How y'all doing? For many of you who actually found my channel, probably came in for my paleontology stuff or miniatures or my book reviews, but a lot of them cover, fantasy, particularly in the heroic fantasy or sword and sorcery. You may think of them as one and the same, you may find them slight differences, but you know what I'm talking about when I say it, because they go back as far as, the early, 20s and 30s, if not slightly more. I mean, first of all, you'd probably think the granddaddy of them all is Robert Howard for his Conan, one of his famous works of all. But not just that, he's done Call of Atlantis, Bran Mac Morn, and, and of course his first major success when that was Solomon Kane. The idea of these interesting characters that are determined to accomplish these goals, and usually in most of the cases the heart of it was the short story, but also could expand novels. And of course, with Howard's influence, it inspired a whole lot of writers throughout the good chunk of the 1900s. Because you got Fafrd and Grey Mouser by Fritz Leiber. You have Michael Moorcock's famous for a lot of this stuff within the genre. You could, of course, his most famous one of Elric, the sort of anti-Conan creation. But he did other characters as well. Coram. He also did Hawkmoon. He did Von Beck. He did Irikose and others. And other writers as well. I mean, you got C.L. Moore at the same time as Howard and all them. And the Weird Tales. He created Joril of Joiry. Jack Vance, the Dying Earth series. You got The Broken Sword by Paul Anderson. Carl E. Wagner's Kane series. And whether you look for novels like this or you could maybe find anthology books like this one that, takes a collection of them, put it right there. I mean, when I look at the bookshelves today in any Barnes Noble or something like that, you don't instantly see stories like this anymore. Fantasy genre has changed as far as the market has gone. Nothing wrong with that. I mean, good story is a good story. But you don't see the stuff like this today stand out in the same vein as the stuff of old. You may see some of these reprinted, some more than others, of course. I see some Michael Moorcock on the shelves and Robert E. Howard. I never find Carl E. Wagner on the shelves there. You have to probably get those digital downloaded. I don't see. Paul Anderson's book came out last year or so, and but this one should be. There's only 5 stories here, but I guess the point is, for something that helped define a genre that later influences in other forms of media, like tabletop role-playing games, video games, of course, board games, the idea where you play, where the character, short and simply, gets into a situation and uses his, combat skills or his wits and all that, overcomes these obstacles in these, in a nice, short and sweet adventure manner. Main influence is Dungeons & Dragons, but what about today? I mean, a lot of this stuff, all the stuff I mentioned here is, done by people in the past. The vast majority aren't even alive anymore. Moorcock's the only one I know, who's still around kicking today. But what about today? What about the people who are inspired by stuff like this, or, who are into the games that are derived from this? If you were a creative person, where would you? Is there a magazine or that could publish this? Well, I may have an answer for it. Sometime a few months ago, I looked at the shelves in Barnes Noble and I noticed these. It doesn't look like your typical anthology books. They're not that thick. It's called Heroic Fantasy Quarterly. Well, actually, the best of Heroic Fantasy Quarterly, Volumes 1 and Volume 2, and this is an e-zine. It's an electronic magazine. You go to the website and you just read it for free. I found these. These are just again, the best of selected stories from certain years. Volume 1 covers from stories they collected from 2009 to 2011. Volume 2 from 2011-2013. These are newer stories that came out last 10 years or so, and they are just they're just that they're derived influenced by the stories I've just mentioned here and by new writers, and they could be doing this as a hobby or it could be expressing their life's work, but they submitted these in and they're for anyone to read. So so I picked these up and I just had to do it. First of all, of course, they lovely cover by, this one attracted me most because it's Justin Sweet. And this one right here, different artists I don't regularly recognize, but of course they listed in there. But the idea is that for those who love all that I've listed before, and they want to read brand new, fresh stories that, that can keep people influenced into Sword and Sorcery and Heroic Fantasy, these are it. Now, I've got some notes right here about that. I mean, the main editors of this, I'm going to list them right here, is Arian Skiba, Barbara Barrett, James Frederick William Rowe, William Ledbetter, David Farney, and Adrian Simmons. Those last two are actually in Oklahoma, and one of them lives in Norman, Oklahoma, which is where I live. So I found that kind of interesting. Maybe I'll find him one of these days and talk about this. But I think this is a great, thing for those of you who are interested in heroic fantasy and want to read some new stuff. This is a magazine you could go buy. You don't have to subscribe like you do a YouTube channel. You just go in, pick an issue, and and read as bunch of stories and even poetry. Later, they even put illustrations to accompany that. And it's quarterly, so it's every four times a year if they stick to schedule. And let me go over example of some of these. From the first one, some of the selected stories I particularly stand out to me. Man in Moldania by Richard Marsden. This one is about a dragon slayer who's in his old age. He's running out of work. He comes across this old, run-down little village in the middle of nowhere that has a dragon problem, and he wants to go in and help them. And it turns out more than it got more than what he bargained for here. Then we got The Black Flowers of Savan by James Leakey. This one is a man who works for this one lord. He's a soldier, and he makes a bet with some guy to try and steal the jewels from this lord's wife. And he ends up running into a secret about the relationship between the lord and his wife, who's this unearthly beauty about her. Another one is A Monster in the Mountains by William Girk. This is about a cursed man trying to seek shelter in this huge snowstorm. And when he does, he finds out that the man of the house there tries to kill him. And by taking him down, he finds out it's connected to some mysterious force up in the mountains that's causing him to kill travelers who come by and seek shelter there. So what is it? Well, it's in the title, but I'll leave the details up to you for those who are interested. We have Shadows from Firelight by R. Michael Burns. This one actually really, I like this one a lot. He actually writes a series of stories that takes place in feudal Japan, more fantastical feudal Japan. Let's see. Samurai Hokage chases a demon to take back the spirit of the Lord's daughter. Pretty much simple about that. His companion is a nine-tailed fox who's also a trickster. So for those of you who played the game Sekiro and you want to read fiction that's kind of along the lines or gives you a good visual of that, check this one out. But that's some of the example stories of Part 1. In Part 2, some of the selected stories I want to mention here. Demon Fang, again, R. Michael Burns, is another story of the Samurai Hokage, who's now, Hokage is now faced with an onslaught, an assault from these supernatural creatures, and the only way he can stop it is by taking his sword, which is a magical blade, and to try and get it to the leader. Very nice, short and simple, sweet. Death at the Pass by Michael R. Fletcher. The premise is really neat. You got this one guy who rises from the dead. He was a champion of a city and empire who gave him these magical equipment, a sword and everything. But sometime in the past he got killed. Now he's resurrected by a necromancer, and this necromancer is trying to use him and his whole army of undead for her own purposes. So the interaction between him and the necromancer and I think it's a very interesting part of the story. Let's see, we got The Princess Trap by Peter Derbyshire. Amusing, but it's also what it is this young orphan girl who after being orphaned here, she has nowhere else to go, and she's kind of outcast by the village. This dragon comes by and takes her in, surrounds her area and is making her a princess. She's not a princess at all, but she is now bait as a princess for knights to come by and attack the dragon so he can eat them. It's pretty much simple as that. She doesn't know what to make of it, And a few knights would come by. He would kill them. She would try to help him out, but he would, he always defeats them all the same. She would gather the gold and any sort of equipment from the knights, from the dead bodies, and she kind of, she sort of, listens to the dragon who tells her about the outside world, about castles and queens, and how it was so great back in the old days. They're not the same as they are before, the events of the war and everything. So it's a very amusing story. And let's see, we have A Game of Chess by David Pilling. This is where a knight, Sir Kay, him and another knight, they go off and inadvertently end up in the land of Fairy, and through the arrogance of his companion, he gets caught and captured. Where the only way Sir Kay can rescue him is to play a game of chess with this one fairy lord, and so this is more of a game of wits and all, direct combat, but Sword and Sorcery is not always formulaic. There are some variations. Rindor's Remission by Russell Miller. This one is very humorous. In fact, I like how it stuck to me. It's an ancient wizard. He's past his glory days. He's not a good health. You'll find out how bad his health is in the first sentence, where it really hurts. But he lives in his tower. He's got an apprentice who's terrible. Got a woman who does the cooking for him, and now he's under attack by his old rival who he defeated some years ago, and. It's just like, whatever. His attitude about this. So what he does, how he does to stop his old rival in their interactions, I thought was amusing. But there's other stories as well. I didn't even get mentioned of poetry. So there's many poetic works there. They used to be strict to fantasy worlds, but they've also extended to more historical based. One of the editors, Adrian Simmons, he writes one of the stories in part 2. Well, it's a poem right there, so it works out. But again, the idea of this review is to introduce you to this. These are the 2 volumes, but if you don't want to buy these, or if you want, or you get these and want to read more, you go to their website, you pick one of their issues, and you read it for free. So I'll link it down below, Heroic Fantasy Quarterly. But what if you're the type of person that's creative, that wants to write and publish stories of this kind? Well, you can bring submissions. They do have submission guidelines, and as of the time I'm making this video, bear in mind that they're not taking anything. We plan to reopen the submission in March of 2019, so bear that in mind. And this is one of those cases where when you do write, you may want to pay close attention to these guidelines and make sure your work follows along with it. Let me see if I can go through this. Let's see. If you submit fiction or poetry and you must receive auto response, let's see. As the name suggests, Heroic Fantasy Quarterly is a quarterly easy dedicated to publishing heroic fantasy in both prose and poetry. We are unrepentant in our goal of elevating unapologetic sword and sorcery to a rightful high place. We pay $100 for stories and $25 for poems upon publication. Scroll down for info on art submissions. We purchase First World English language electronic rights for 90 days, archival rights for 12 months, and excerpt rights. Our fiction word limit is a soft 10,000 words, although we are willing to serialize maximum 50,000 words over 4 issues. We may submit up to 3 poems with a cumulative maximum of 30 pages. No simultaneous submissions, please. We don't have ironclad rule regarding our fiction payment. We roughly pay $25 for stories under 1,000 words, $50 for stories between 1,000 to 500 words, $75 for stories between 5,700 and 7,500 words, and $100 for stories 7,500 words or over. Token-esque, as in really long poetry, epic sagas, Vedas, will most likely be treated and paid like fiction. Similarly, prose pieces of fewer than 1,000 words will be paid at a poetry standard rate of $25. And you really think it's kind of low. Bear in mind, this is sort of, there's another e-zine called Blackgate. They're basically, in the intro to this, they're basically a poor man's version of this. There's no physical, magazines. The only thing physical they ever published was D's. This is more of a labor of love, but they're not above paying for these. If you think that's kind of low, bear in mind, many of these pulp fiction writers, like Robert E. Howard, they were paid a penny a word. So, back in their day. And that was going on for like 50s and 60s when the pulps were still running there. Harlan Ellison's got a video interview. You look up Harlan Ellison interview where he talks about his pulp fiction writing and what all he had to go through to that. So, yeah, a penny a word in most cases, half a cent a word. So it wasn't a, and now you probably could go, if you could get your stuff published in bigger magazines, they'll probably pay you a lot more. But this magazine is, more a lot of the labor of love, so they have to do what they can. But you won't be without nothing. So, let's see. They have submission about art, submission, let's see. Let me scroll down a bit. More details about the editorial process. Things we shouldn't even have to say, but just to cover the bases. No fan fiction. No thinly veiled fan fiction. No thinly veiled real-life revenge fantasies, especially against your esteemed editors. Bonus modifiers. 3 words. Heroic fantasy fiction. We are a half-orc positive venue. Action is an art, not a diversion. 1 word. Visceral. Know your horses. Dwarves who don't always win. Barbarians with feelings. Negative modifiers. Barbarians with feelings. 3 words. Heroic fantasy parodies. Really exacting blow-by-blow combat scenes. Frequent or lengthy inner dialogue. 2 words. Overly descriptive. Bear in mind you're writing short stories, you gotta get straight to the point. Stuff you obviously lifted from your D&D, White Wolf, Legend of Five Rings, Tunnels and Trolls. Oh my god, did anyone actually play Tunnels and Trolls games? Any mention at all about playing Tunnels and Trolls? Your second tier submission is not in proper manuscript format. You let the R rating go into your head. Violence and sex should augment the story, not be the story. And you go up to their website, look up submission guidelines, follow the rules, and hey, you may find it kind of limiting based on your knowledge there, but art thrives in limitation, and that may get, force more creativity. Again, Harlan Ellison talked about that in his interview when he wrote in the pulps. And so here you go. You just go to the website there. It has the top line has about the editors, advertising, anthologies. It has blog, but also below there you have fiction, main, poetry, and you got the archives where you look up each issue and you click on that. And right now it's loading, and there you go, Heroic Fantasy Quarterly 1, and the stories and poetries involved. You just click on that, and you just scroll down. So, if you have access to the internet, and you can pick up any story, you can pick any issue you want, and just give it a go and try for it. So there you go, Heroic Fantasy Quarterly. I picked these up and I didn't regret it. There's a lot of stuff I enjoyed about this, and so you could probably pick these up on Amazon. Maybe I got these in Barnes & Noble. You can find them too if you want physical copies of these. But bear in mind, this is not all what they have to offer. I haven't got started reading anything online yet, and that's where you get. And I think more people should be aware of this. If you're into fantasy, particularly heroic fantasy and stories, you want some inspiration for any of your role-playing games or board games, check this out. They can use the support. So there you go, Heroic Fantasy Quarterly Volume 1 and 2, and the website for feature stuff down below. Thank you all for watching. You have a nice day. Oh, and by the way, while I was trying to look for picks to do the beginning introduction to this video, I suddenly came across a Kickstarter that was successfully funded back between May and June of the Best Heroic Fantasy Quarterly Volume 3, which apparently, according to Amazon, is out now. It came out last October. So one of these days I'll have to check into that just to continue on this, but remember, you don't have to buy these in order to enjoy the stories. All these stories are available on their website for free, so if you're like me, I like to have a physical copy of many of these stories, but eventually I'll get to that website and find some others that may find enjoyable, and I hope you do too. So so Volume 3 is apparently out, and the first 2 are already of course already out, but if you don't have the money for it, just go to the website and click on issue and enjoy.